Hey everyone, my name is Zachary, and you're listening to the Worn Shoes Podcast, the show that looks at people living around the world and the extraordinary in their everyday lives. This episode's going to be a little different. In talking with a friend, I realized that some of you know me, but some of you probably don't, and in light of that, I thought I could give a small picture of who I am and a bit of my story. In this episode, one of my friends, Luke, asks me a couple questions about my life and story and some of the motivation behind starting this podcast. I hope you guys enjoy getting to know me a little better through this chat. Stick around towards the end as I talk about what's coming up next. Hey everyone. My friend Luke is here, who's one of my really good friends, and he's going to be asking me a couple questions about my life and story, just so you guys can get to know me a little bit better, and see how this goes.
Yeah. So I guess to introduce who I am, I'm a friend of Zachary's. We first met in college. We kind of floated in similar circles, but didn't really get to know each other super well until we ended up living together senior year. Mm-hmm. But since then, hit it off and have been super close friends for, I guess, 4 years now. Yeah. Which is crazy to think about. But yeah, so I've been invited on to ask him some questions about who he is. So I guess kind of to start, I know your background better than most. But could you explain to me what home is to you? Yeah.
I think right now, I've gotten married recently, for about a year and we've been married for about a year and a half, to Michelle. And so I think, I think when I think of home, I do really think of when I'm hanging out with her and with her. And I do think of Chattanooga, Tennessee as a type of home. I've been living here for seven-ish years, I think. And before that, I was in Azerbaijan for 10 years. Yeah. And I think I used to think of that as home, and that was kind of a really strong feeling. But as time has kind of gone on, I don't know that I would characterize it with the word home. But it was that at one point.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone knows where Azerbaijan is.
Yeah.
Could you describe where it is?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not one of the big ones that people usually know where it is. Yeah. The way I like to talk about it is it's kind of squashed between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. It's kind of Middle East, kind of Central Asia, kind of Europe. It's just a weird blend of things. Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia are all kind of stuck together. So they're the Caucasus Mountains are in the northern region of Azerbaijan. So that's kind of where it is. We're next to the Caspian Sea. Yeah. And growing up, we like to say that we lived in Narnia because of Prince Caspian. And all of that, because it did seem like a fantastical place. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so, because you kind of mixed the two, like mixed topography with culture. Yeah. But culturally, I guess it is a blend of all those different places. Yeah. But I would also assume it has its own, like, individual culture or culturist, I don't know, flair.
Yeah. So, yeah, Azerbaijan, they're a Turkic people. Okay. The Persian Empire was there. It's like the language is like 90% similar to Turkish. They were a part of the former Soviet Union, so a lot of people spoke Russian, and still do. There's about 9 million people, and I mean it's a fascinating culture, and I mean I think it is really unique. The city, I love thinking about the city, Baku, just because there's the old city, which is the inner city, and then there's kind of during the Soviet period, you kind of go out a little further, and there's just kind of the Soviet, classic building blocks, block apartments, and then you go out, and that is when Azerbaijan had their oil boom, and so there's a lot of like modern buildings. It's where the Nobel brothers came to make their money, and made their money. Yeah. And so there's just a lot of really weird, wacky buildings. So it's a fascinating city. And I loved growing up there. So yeah.
Yeah. So what cultural, I guess, attributes ties the people of Azerbaijan together?
Whoa, yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
What ties them together?
I'm just thinking they have so many different cultural backgrounds with like Soviet Union, but they're also somewhat Middle Eastern, somewhat Asian. Like it's so many different things. It's such a large area of land, but relatively speaking, a smaller group of people of 9 million. So what is their cultural identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are all those backgrounds, and I mean, but I think there is a really strong Azerbaijani identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they do tie themselves a lot to Turkey. There's a phrase, if dad listens to this, he might correct me on it, but I think it's Bir millet, iki devlet, which means one nation, two countries.
Okay.
And they're talking about Turkey, like two countries and one nation, and they're just very closely tied to kind of the Turkish identity, but they're also kind of their own thing. And I mean, there's a Zoroastrian history too.
Yeah.
There's like
Cool.
there's a fire temple. A big kind of part of their cultural identity, I guess, is fire. They commonly talk about like Azerbaijan, the land of fire. I don't know exactly when it came to be, but there's this idea of the eternal flame.
Okay.
And I don't remember if it's natural gas or oil, but there's an eternal flame that's going on kind of the boulevard.
Oh, that's sick.
And it's been burning for decades, and it's this idea of just the eternal flame. And yeah, there's a lot. There's minority groups within Azerbaijan, like the Lezgi people group is a big one, and it's really cool with the Caucasus Mountains.
Yeah.
But there's a story that I've heard that I've just loved this image, where they were talking about when God was passing out all the languages in the world, and he passed over the Caucasus Mountains. The mountains were so tall that the bag ripped and all the languages fell out. So there's just totally separate dialects and languages in the Caucasus Mountains with these different people groups that just historically is just really, really cool. And I was talking with my mom and dad, and they're actually headed out to the regions in Azerbaijan this week, and going to visit cities called like Nij and Sheki. And Nij in particular is just really cool, having a really ancient connection with kind of the Syriac Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And
cool.
So yeah, there's a whole bunch there. Yeah, like you said. Yeah.
So it's a melting pot of languages. What languages do you know?
Yeah. I know Russian. I used to know it fluently. I wouldn't say I do anymore. In the 7 years of being in the U.S.
Fluent for an American.
Fluent for an American, yeah.
For a Russian, they might cringe a little, but they'll appreciate it.
Well, the Russians cringed anyways because I had a Bakuvian accent, which is very distinct.
Yeah.
I've been trying to keep up with my Russian, but it's just hard when you're not immersed in it anymore.
Of course, yeah.
And then when I was living in Azerbaijan, I knew enough Azeri to get by, conversational Azeri. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And what are the other major languages of Azerbaijan?
Those are really the big two.
Okay.
There's smaller languages. Yeah, like I said, the Lezgi. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they have their own language. But yeah, it's interesting because in Baku, people like start a sentence in Russian, end it in English. I actually think I mentioned that on the episode with Grace.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really cool. And most people that are kind of older, I guess, now they would be maybe in their mid 30s or late 40s that, were alive during the Soviet Union. And they know Russian and Azeri and just totally blend them together.
It's become one thing.
Yeah, it's its own thing.
Yeah. And as they're a Turkic, like, folk, I guess, would there be a lot of Turkish or...
I mean, Turkish in the sense of like Turkish and Azerbaijan, you're like 90% the same. Okay, so like you could go to like when we actually did go to Turkey, and when we were there, I mean, there's just like little things that were different that we noticed, like a J instead of a G or something. But I mean, really, it's pretty similar.
Yeah. Okay. Because I know also Turkey, they are a predominantly Muslim nation, but it's almost it's more of a secular Islam than a lot of other nations. Yeah. What would the main religion of Azerbaijan? You said Zoroastrianism, but I'm assuming also a bunch of Islam.
Yeah, so they're 99% Muslim. Okay. For the most part. Okay. Yeah, from what I mean, at least with my experience growing up and interacting with people, there was kind of there's not a lot of devout Muslims, I guess. I mean, that's probably a really big generalization.
It's more of a cultural thing than a staunch
there's a lot
thing.
of cultural Islam. So yeah, that's the predominant denomination, or not denomination, the predominant religion. Yeah.
I know we're adjusting to the American way of denomination.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I can imagine, or at least we've talked about it at length personally, but like there's been quite a cultural shift moving from Azerbaijan back to the States. How has that been for you?
Yeah. I mean, moving back for my freshman year of school, to go to college, Covenant College, was, I think the first year was fine. It was fun because there was a lot of new stuff. Yeah. I was just really...
New stuff like what?
Like going to college. I mean, college in and of itself, right? There's just a whole adjustment there. And so... I think between doing school and, playing sports and meeting new people, I didn't have a lot of time to really think and engage with stuff culturally.
Kind of had to hit the ground running and just make
right.
do,
Yeah, I think my sophomore year, a lot more stuff hit me, and then that was a lot harder.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, speaking of Islam, one of the biggest cultural shocks was just the way that Islam is perceived here, especially by some of my friends.
Definitely.
Yeah, of just kind of this, and this may be within Christian circles. I haven't really experienced a whole lot of outside of that, but just kind of, a real fear of Islam, and just kind of looking down on it, which hadn't been my experience growing up. There's an analogy that my dad loves to give that I think is just funny. But between Judaism, the Judeo-Christian religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Muslims kind of view Judaism as like Windows XP, right? The original one. And then Christianity's, Windows 7 or whatever, and then Islam is the upgraded one. They're Windows 10. They're kind of the most updated version.
Not Windows 11 because
right, we don't like that. But and so I think coming back here and just kind of seeing some of the ways that people talked about Islam was kind of really shocking and a little bit jarring, and being like, that's not really my experience. And then just other things. I mean, I drank milk and ate dairy totally fine growing up in Azerbaijan.
Okay.
No problems. I would eat blocks of cheese, and the dairy guy would deliver, fresh milk, and we would, boil it and drink that, and it was great, and I was fine. And I came here, and all of a sudden I'm lactose intolerant, and I can't eat anything.
Such a shame.
So I don't know what happened there. But I think food, and then just kind of culturally, I think moving to the south was a little easier because Azerbaijani culture is not very direct at all, very indirect. So I think, moving to the south where people are, a little more indirect.
And when you say direct versus indirect, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, like in Azerbaijan, it feels like fairly common knowledge. If someone says, would you like a glass of tea? You say no. And you ask again, would you like a glass of tea? And they say no. And then the third time is when they're really asking. And if you say no, then you mean no, and if you say yes. And so there's just funny stories of like Azerbaijanis, asking foreigners of like, oh, would you like a glass of tea? And they're like, yes. And they're like, wait a minute.
They must really want to have some tea. Yeah.
Or like I didn't, I was gonna ask for the third time, but like I actually didn't really want them to cut. It's just because that's the thing they'll do is they'll ask you 2 times, and then the third one never comes, and that means they didn't want to have you over for tea anyways. And so I think
it's almost like around here it's the hey, how you doing as a greeting, and then if you respond with anything other than good, it's like, what the heck's going on?
What's happening?
It's like, I don't care about how you're actually doing.
Right.
I didn't ask you 3 times.
And so I think just kind of that indirect culture, especially in the South, was a little more comfortable for me. Although there's people at Covenant that aren't or at school that weren't Southern and had even if they had just a very direct way of communicating, which that was jarring. And I think my personality, I don't tend to be a super direct communicator. So I think all of that, and there's probably more, but
So we've got Southern hospitality here. You have Azerbaijani hospitality at home. As opposed to the super direct. Which is interesting because you're hosting a podcast where you are very direct. And so what prompted you to start this podcast?
So in the years after graduating and working, I had a couple office jobs, and so I think I love podcasts. I listened to a bunch of them. My Spotify Wrapped one year had hundreds of hours of podcasts. Just
hundreds. You mean thousands?
But and so I think I always liked the idea of doing a podcast.
Of course,
but I was just trying to find the right idea. And I think part of my story with coming back here, which I don't think is terribly uncommon with kids that have grown up overseas and transitioned back, is I really wanted to deny that I grew up in Azerbaijan at a point. I believe as a sort of coping mechanism of just really not wanting to be identified by where I grew up, and or by growing up overseas, and just kind of really, at one point I was like, I was born in Hollywood, California. I was there for 3 years.
Okay.
We moved away, never been back.
Yeah.
And so I started telling people, I'm from California. And then I met some Californians, and they asked me more questions, and that got me in trouble. But I think part of my heart with starting this podcast was the stories that people have growing up internationally, or just having lived internationally, I think are different, and they're not always good. There's a lot of good in it, but there is also hard things, and I think those things are worth sharing and worth listening to, and I believe they brought in our perspectives. And I wanted to start it because I just wanted to talk to people and hear their stories. Like the people I've interviewed of Grace, and a little bit later here Ismail, like their stories are just, they're valuable, and I think they're interesting, and I've learned stuff from them. So part of it is selfish, right? Like I just want to talk to these people and hear their stories.
These
and
are
I
cool
think
people with cool stories, so
exactly,
you want to hear it,
So I think
and the
that's
podcast's a good excuse to get to hear those stories.
Exactly. And I think other people should listen to them too, and you might learn something and brought in your perspective, and I think that's valuable.
Because also, I don't know if you've described it this way, but your podcast is interviewing a lot of these TCKs or third culture kids, which take a blend of one culture and a secondary culture and create their own third that is unique. And so all of these people do have unique stories, but with a lot of similar threads with your own that people can gain a lot from.
Absolutely.
So could you kind of expand on why you are calling it Worn Shoes, and why specifically TCKs were your target demographic for interviews, at least?
Yeah, for sure. So I think TCKs are definitely are a large part of the demographic that I'm interviewing. But I think also people that have adults that have like moved,
TCAs.
Yeah, right.
Third culture
adults. Yeah, or whatever they are.
Yeah.
just living internationally. I think it is really so valuable with broadening your perspective.
Yeah,
and
totally.
If you're not able to do that, listening to stories that are international is really valuable.
Yeah.
And I think the worn shoes idea, I mean, I deliberated for a while on what the name of the podcast would be, and I think I just love the idea of worn shoes. Mm-hmm. Because I feel, and this is my experience, and maybe it's not everyone's, but at any given point in time, growing up and even now, I have a favorite pair of shoes that I will wear to death because I love them, and they may be comfortable, they may be not, they may look cool, they may not look cool, but I love them, and I just wear them to death everywhere I go, whether it's, walking, running, or, around the house, or if it's to a party or to church, or, whatever. It's these shoes go everywhere with me. And so I think the idea is people just wear, shoes that are the most worn have been the most places. Yeah. And so I think the idea is, people that have traveled a lot or lived different places, lived internationally and traveled back and forth, that their shoes are going to be, their story shoes may have a lot. And so I think that's the idea. I don't know that I explained it super well, but
no, it makes sense.
Yeah.
What were some of the other ideas for podcast names that you had?
Oh geez, I'll be honest, I don't remember.
Yeah, nothing else stuck.
Yeah, nothing else really stuck. I think there were some really cringy ones that maybe I don't want to go into.
From overseas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
TCKs in all of us, or
something like that. Yeah, but I think worn shoes is just cool, and it's kind of like, what does that mean? And I mean, the logo that was done by one of our good friends, Josh Platts, I think is amazing, because if you really kind of look into it, there's just all the different ways that people travel. There's there's wheelchairs, there's buses, trains, planes, dress shoes, boots. There's even rock climbing shoes, which I'm partial to.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
But just all the different types of avenues that people travel and move around with. So yeah.
Yeah. And even for, I think I've never been a part of the podcast until right now.
Yeah.
But I've been with you in this journey of starting it, and it is cool from kind of an outsider's perspective who knows about it. Every culture has their own version of shoes.
Right. Exactly.
And it's so many people have their own versions of shoes, like the wheelchair versus my own shoes.
Right.
But then also, we've got certain cultures that wear sandals and others that wear boots.
Right.
And even I don't know, but it is cool that every different culture has their own shoes, and the steps that we take, we get to absorb new stories as we kind of live life.
Yeah.
And I think that the name that you have come up with is a really good reflection of that.
Yeah. Thank you. And even within the United States, there's different shoes, shoes that reflect the culture. Like in Chattanooga, it would be Chacos.
Yep.
So every place has their own their own culture and shoes, which is awesome.
Also, very much a tangent, but they're the Pacific Northwest lager boots versus other lager boots that just have different
cowboy
things.
Boots
And cowboy
Texas.
Boots. Yeah, that's so true. And I can't think of others now. Oh, well, I guess also Doc Martens with a lot of the kind of I don't want to say anarchy movements, but the liberation movements,
the Doc Martens.
And it is so interesting.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Shoe culture, man.
Yeah,
I don't know much about it.
Shoe culture.
But it is its own thing.
Yeah.
It is cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the culture of shoes, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, I would like to ask you a very important question.
Yeah.
what are your current shoes that you wear the most?
What are my current shoes that I wear the most? Yeah.
Are they your fluffy zebra Crocs? Or
calling me out? No, they're not my fluffy zebra Crocs. Yeah, I think this past. I'm sorry, this is probably gonna come across as very basic, but my past birthday, my mom got me Birkenstocks, and they are incredibly comfortable, and so I do wear those. Those are my everywhere shoes right now. So inside, outside, walking around, I do love my Birkenstocks. So this is not a sponsored ad, but Birkenstocks are, really good.
And if they do want to sponsor this podcast,
exactly, yeah, Birkenstock.
We would not be opposed.
Yeah, for sure.
Add shameless plug here.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, those are my favorite shoes right now.
Cool. Well, I wanted to backtrack just a little bit because you only really mentioned living in California.
Yeah.
Or being born in California, and then at 3 moving overseas.
Yeah.
And then you've talked about Azerbaijan and then moving back. But I know that there are quite a few years of your story kind of missing in that.
Yeah.
Where else have you lived, and kind of what trails have you taken, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, after California, and I may get my timeline here, and I know my family will call me out, but I think we moved to Tennessee, and then I think we went to Uzbekistan, which kind of, when I was describing Azerbaijan earlier, is kind of on the other side of the Caspian Sea. Mm-hmm. And we were there for 4 years. We ended up leaving because there was some internal conflict stuff going on.
Yeah.
With the government, and I believe we were in England for a little while, and then Ukraine, and then Belgium, maybe for and we were in each of those places for maybe anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, I think, and then we came back here for about a year before we went to Azerbaijan. So that's kind of the timeline of what I was doing. To be honest, I don't really remember a whole lot of England, Belgium, or Ukraine. But I remember Uzbekistan pretty clearly, but it's kind of a blur after that. So just a lot of really quick, kind of intense transitions.
Yeah.
So,
and out of all of those places, what felt the most foreign to you?
What felt the most foreign to me? Interesting. Yeah, I think Belgium. I loved it. I loved being there. I mean, from the things that I can remember, it was fun, but it just felt weird. It felt really I think in Azerbaijan, we were kind of in this I think we're in a mining town, and it was just kind of dusty, and things felt kind of raw and maybe gritty in a sense, but in a good and kind of fun way, especially as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I think Belgium just felt so refined and tight, I guess. And so I guess I felt a little bit at times when I was there that I couldn't breathe, and it was very felt kind of constricting. And I think that's also because the way we left Uzbekistan was pretty intense. Mm-hmm. And so I think in Belgium was when I kind of really started coming to terms with that and really grappling with that grief. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was I felt the contrasts of Belgium to Uzbekistan more viscerally, I think, because of being in Uzbekistan and leaving kind of the way we did. So, yeah.
And why did your family make all of these moves or transitions? Yeah,
I mean, I think at that point we were expecting to be in Uzbekistan for a while, and so I think it was kind of a shock when things happened. And I mean, I don't know that I've talked with my parents why we moved all those places, but I mean, it was probably just trying to figure out what to do next. If we're going to be back in the States or where we were going to next. So I'm not 100% sure, but yeah.
I can imagine bouncing around a lot. Lots of friendships were forged and also broken, and that could be a pretty hard thing for a little Zachary.
Yeah. I mean, we had a we had a couple of friends in Ukraine that was kind of hard to leave, or that were kind of hard to leave, and in Belgium, you know, we made some friends here and there, but I don't really remember. Yeah, I don't really remember it, to be honest. But I mean, it probably was hard, and I mean, at that age, just kind of being used to traveling around, I guess, and people leaving and coming and leaving already, it just felt kind of normal, I guess. What I felt a lot more was when I came to the States, and I went to a elementary school. I think, Fairland Elementary up on Lookout, and I really remember not blending in at all there, and not knowing what on earth was going on, and making friends there was pretty hard. There was one guy that kind of took me in, and I was friends with, but I remember a couple instances of just doing stuff and everyone being like, that is not what you do, you know, and I think being there and then leaving there with some of the friends I'd made was a lot harder, and I remember that a lot more.
So with all that transition, what was it like when you finally settled in one place for a longer period of time?
Yeah, I mean, settling in Azerbaijan was really hard at first, but we got there, and it was it was good. I know that's not super descriptive, but I mean, I was with my family, and we kind of knew that this was a long-term thing. I think I was maybe 8 or 9 when we got to Azerbaijan, and we knew this was like going to be a long thing. And so I think it was exciting to kind of be like, okay, we're here for the foreseeable future. And I know for me, at least, I felt a degree of relief within that. So and then leaving was hard, you know. I mean, it was kind of, you know, coming back here. We talked a little bit about it, but just kind of, you know, being excited for new things and stuff is going on. But I had to leave, you know, friends and family and stuff back there. So I think that was hard too. Yeah.
And I know you said the reason you moved stateside was university or college. But why not stay in Azerbaijan for that?
I mean, I think I don't know. I think I didn't really want to go to school in Russian. That wasn't something that really appealed to me, I guess, at that point. I did really want to come back to the States because I think, to me, I had this vision of, because being in Azerbaijan was good, but it was also pretty hard. And so I think I kind of viewed coming back to the States as like this reprieve, you know, this kind of sigh of relief of just kind of being in something that feels normal. And then I got here and I was like, oh, this doesn't feel normal. But I didn't really want to go back either. And so that's where I kind of had this like, well, screw it, I'm from California, you know. And
because there was almost this expectation of familiarity in coming home, but then it didn't really feel like home.
Nope.
So that's where you ended up really realizing, I guess kind of full circle, that home for you is more about the people that are there than the location itself.
It is. And I mean, it's it's definitely a journey that I think a lot of TCKs go through, of just kind of, because I mean, I've seen, you know, a fair amount of TCKs, and just kind of like either, you know, just incredibly strongly like attaching to, you know, where they grew up, or their parents' culture, or, you know, quote unquote home culture, or just really attaching to the TCK identity. And I mean, I think, for me, I feel like I have to hold all three of those loosely, and just kind of accept that, just kind of I don't know, nomad feels like a dramatic word, but just kind of this wander, you know, that doesn't necessarily, you know, identify with any one culture in and of itself. But I mean, I think for me personally, I do find home to be with the people that I'm with, and my identity as being a believer and in Jesus, and just kind of really finding home to be there. And something that I've always kind of found to be really encouraging is just the idea of an eternal home, and just kind of home being eventually heaven when we get to be with the ones that we love and with Jesus. So I think that has been a comforting idea for me through my journey.
Yeah.
So
well, cool. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing and for having me on. It was fun to interview you, and I hope it's fun for people to hear or get to know you as the interviewer more. You Hopefully. Definitely have a really, really cool story that I think we need to dedicate even more time to. I think that would be really cool sometime. Yeah. I know that it feels weird, but thank you for having me on, and thank you for being you, and for being, for me, some of my home.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bar.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Luke. I hope that you guys enjoyed getting to hear a part of my story and some of the motivation behind the podcast. The next episode will be with Ismael from Mexico, so be sure to check that out. Music is done by Julian Laurie on Spotify, and cover art was done by Josh Platts. If you have an international story or experience that you would like to share, or know someone who does, please reach out to us at wornshoespodcast@gmail.com or at wornshoespodcast on Instagram. Thank you all for your continued support, and tune in next time at Worn Shoes.